Hello, this is Mike McKibben. I am the CEO of Leader Technologies and also the CEO of MySkiff Privacy app. And I am honored today to have a group of engineers and mathematicians that were a part of the team that developed MySkiff over the previous number of years. The gentleman with the beard in the blue hat is Tim Fathbruckner, and Tim was one of our lead developers back in the day when we invented social media or social networking at Leader Technologies. In fact, there's a sub detail there that it was on October 28th of 2003 when Tim finally debugged the key tracking component of our social networking invention that led to the emergence of the social networking world. And it was the same night that Zuckerberg hacked into the house sites at Harvard. So that's just a little bit of tidbit. So down below him is Steve, and Steve has been involved with us as a network engineering specialist, and he can give a little bit of his background in terms of his former clients. But what we wanted to do today was introduce you to some of the expertise that's involved with MySkiff. Next to him in the view is Dr. Al Carlson. And Al, it's hard to summarize his background, but he's a mathematician, he's a professor, he is a raconteur. No, I don't know if you're a raconteur, Al. But anyway, hopefully we'll get more into his background and specifically related to polymorphic mathematics. And then in the upper right-hand corner in the nice red hair is Ben. And Ben is headquartered in Alaska, I believe. And Ben has also been a mathematician involved in the development of MySkiff. So welcome, gentlemen. Today, what I wanted to do is have a roundtable discussion that would enable network, especially network engineers, to understand what MySkiff privacy app is all about and why it is a necessary tool in any network engineer's encryption strategy as we go forward. And one of the things I know you've heard from our website is we are employing something called polymorphic mathematics, or it's polymorphic encryption. And rather than talk about it myself, let me bring in the expert, Dr. Al, and ask him to give us an overview of what polymorphic mathematics is and why it's a critical component that network managers need to be considering. Al, can you give us
Thank you, Mike.
little overview?
Thank you, Mike. The easy way to explain polymorphic encryption is polymorphic means many forms. And what we do is we use Shannon type communication theory that says that information accumulates at a known rate that you can measure. And what we do is we change the cipher and the key pair that is happening in a time that is under that which the information can accumulate to allow it to be broken. So basically, we take a large file and we break it up into little bitsy pieces. And those pieces, the size that we know, we can then use any combination of cipher and key together, and we change them irregularly and very fast so that an attacker cannot figure out what the key is and doesn't have enough information in order to break it. And by doing that, we can create a key space that is as large as we need. And as a matter of fact, we can actually do some interesting mathematics that allow us to get key spaces in the neighborhood of about 10 to the 1500th. And in case you don't know, that's a pretty big number. So we use that. We use that so that other people cannot use brute force attacks or other what we call heuristic attacks to be able to break it. Now, why is that important? because most people are very, very used to using the same key for long periods of time, and it gives the attacker enough information to be able to break into their messages and hear them. With this, an attacker has to figure out where all of the boundaries are for the polymorphic, what we call shards, because it's like taking a rock and throwing it through a window and ending up with lots of weird pieces that have to be put together. The more pieces you have, the harder it is to put it together. And so it should take so much time that the universe winks out of existence and comes back several times before you can possibly break it. And that's the basics, the high-level basics of polymorphic encryption. So don't think of it as just one encryption. Think of it as multiple encryptions shoved together in an engine that we can control and make really, really strong.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit more about what exists now and what people might be familiar with that would be a comparison to what you just described?
Okay, well, the easy way to explain that part of things is that most people right now are used to AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard, which, by the way, is a pretty good encryption if it's used correctly. The problem is most people don't use encryption correctly. They don't change the keys or the ciphers as necessary. And that makes it very easy for an attacker to break in. So now what they tend to do is they try and randomize it to make it possible to use the same cipher for longer. But in our research, and we've published papers on this, they use something that's called the cryptographic mode. And it turns out that the cryptographic mode is actually easier to break than AES. But all types of ciphers like AES are ultimately substitution ciphers. So it is quite easy to break in. The way to break in is pretty simple. And lots of people say, well, you know, the statistics will make it so that you're never able to break into AES. Got news for you. Broke AES, had fun doing it. And in the new post-quantum environment, it is estimated that AES will survive in its present 256-bit key for about neighborhood of 3 to 4 minutes. And if you go up to the military grade, which is the 4096, it'll survive longer. It'll survive a few months. But the whole point is AES is vulnerable because it uses the same key for a long period of time, and it's very regular. We break up those regularities. We put entropy or randomness in there that makes it a lot safer. So if you can figure out how to break a polymorphic engine, you're better than me, because we haven't been able to figure that out over the last 15 years we've been working on it. Because there just isn't enough way to get that information in. And so why do you want it? You want it because if you want to keep your messages secret for long periods of time, you don't want something that's easily broken.
We see a lot of advertising about encryption, about encrypted services that say they're trusted, they're unhackable, they're secure, and everybody makes that claim. And one of the things that maybe people are familiar with is when you use the HTTPS on your websites, that is using something called the public key infrastructure. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's something that touches everyone. And anyone can chime in here.
Well, first of all, one must recognize that there is no such thing as unhackable, absolutely unhackable mathematics. We call it mathematically, Ben, help me.
Mathematically intractable.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Like my children.
Yeah, sometimes my English isn't so good. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. We call it mathematically intractable, which means that it won't happen by the time you die. And usually that means that the secret's pretty safe by that time. There are a lot of issues that are coming up with the way that public key infrastructure is implemented. Public key infrastructure was started by the government, and it is meant to use what we call trapdoor functions, which are the basis of how you keep something secret in the calculation. It's interesting because they use functions like prime and semi-prime factorization and the discrete logarithm problem. And these are very, very hard for computers now to use. But Grover's algorithm, which was specified in 1994 by not Grover's algorithm, Shor's algorithm, which was specified in 1994, showed that it was possible to break these particular trapdoor algorithms in the post-quantum environment. Now, people ask, when are we going to be in the post-quantum environment? And the answer is we're already in the post-quantum environment. Very soon there will be enough qubits to be able to implement Shor's algorithm. And at that time, all of these PKE algorithms will be very simple and very fast to break using quantum computers. Now, that sounds like it's going to be a long way away, but right now, China and other countries are doing something now that's called harvest now, decrypt later, where they take they copy all your PKE stuff and they say, just wait. In a few years, we'll be able to read everything. Will most of that information be good for them? Well, we don't know. We don't know what they picked up, but they'll be able to break in. So the problem that you've got is that PKE isn't going to be valid. Now, the United States government went on a project with NIST to specify what are called QPAs, or quantum proof algorithms. And it turns out that the quantum proof algorithms that they picked, they selected 4 of them. One of them was broken within a month of being specified. The other 3 were recently announced to have been vulnerable by the work of Dr. Chen. And Dr. Chen has found they were based on mathematics, which wasn't quite proven out at the time. And so they're no good. At this point, the new PKE that are going to be used, it's estimated, will need 1 million bits in their key. And so practically there is no new PKE to be able to use. And you should remember that whenever you have PKE, it's an asymmetric algorithm, which means that you need 2 keys to solve it. But guess what? You have to list 1 key in the public. So that sort of seems not like a good idea, because it comes down to 1 secret key again. So while 2 keys would be better than 1, not if they tell you what 1 is. So we end up having to deal with a situation in which the PKEs are going out the door very soon, and they will be useless to us until new PKEs are developed. How long will that take? Nobody knows yet. So PKEs are
So what you're saying, the current PKI infrastructure, it sounds like it's okay for the average user if they really don't care about the security, but if they care about the security, it's not a protected environment. Is that what you're saying?
That's absolutely true. It's going to no longer be a protected environment. It will be vulnerable.
So, Steve, you've been a network security specialist for a number of large companies. What is your view of this whole PKI infrastructure from the things Al was just telling us?
Good morning, everyone. The public key infrastructure is, I guess one way to describe it is it's a feel good. It's a panache. People think I'm secure because they've been told they're secure. And as Dr. Carlson has very eloquently described, it is, I hate to say, use an extreme word, but pretty much useless. I mean, it makes you feel good, but it is easily cracked. And like you said, the bad guys are harvesting this data, and they're just waiting for the time when they can, when you become a person of interest, let's say, and then they can go back and look at your data set and decide what they want to look at. So in short, it is mostly a feel-good process. We've all had the experience where we go to a website and it's HTTP, it's not secure. The warning comes up in the browser, and the whole infrastructure is designed to steer you to the SSL and the public key encryption because they, powers to be, know how useless it really is.
But they say it's
And
trusted.
it should be noted that SSL and TLS it should be noted that TLS and SSL are known to be vulnerable and broken.
Okay, so what is going on in the marketplace then? If that's true, then are we being told untruths, lies?
We're basically being told half-truths.
Half-truths. Okay.
Half-truths. You can call them lies. Well, it's better to have encryption than no encryption. But we get caught up in this area where, remember that most of the people who are considered experts in cryptography haven't had sufficient background to actually be experts. They've had one, maybe two classes. There are actually very few designers and people who are strong cryptographers. And people put too much reliance on cryptography without knowing its background. For example, when you say, I'm going to put up AES, AES is strong because it has so many keys. Well, there are techniques that are known. It's called isomorphic key reduction, and we also use a technique called isomorphic cipher reduction that allows us to cut those big numbers and make them much, much, much smaller. So it becomes very easy to break, relatively very easy to break those crypto systems, but they're relying on the big numbers that they see out there, which is the maximum security if everything's in right. And then what do? They go and implement it wrong and put in vulnerabilities that make it much easier to crack. So most of the time, there's a mismatch between the security that's needed and the security that's used.
So Tim, you do a lot of development for companies in their software development and in their e-commerce sites and various specialty programs. What, from your standpoint, when you get to having to include encryption, what do you choose for your solution? And what do you tell the customer?
Unfortunately, it kind of stems to what Al was saying, where it's right now, it's what's out there. It's kind of the current thing. So what we tend to do is just look at what the current best standard is, and we apply that to the app infrastructures to do the best you can. And it's mostly following the standards and stuff today in today's day and age. And you see that across a lot of companies. So the guidance and the advice they're taking comes from the publications and standards of the current environments. And what we're finding here now, getting into the research that we've been doing through this new project, is that these vulnerabilities are out there that create in the near future some risk that needs to be assessed and mitigated.
So I think you're saying that you tell the customer this is what is recommended out there, and you don't try to make a claim whether it's actually secure or not.
Correct, because we have it's the security part of it. The encryption half of it's obviously not my particular skill set or strength, but we have to use that framework. So I would probably fall more into what Al was saying. Is like, okay, this is what we've been told is the good standard, gold standard for today. And you see with in a lot of these instances where that's kind of where the app developers and the IT departments and infrastructure people are running the infrastructures where they fall. So I think there is a need for that, especially going forward here as we see these things becoming more and more vulnerable, to expand on that and find something that's going to be that next replacement.
Well, as you and I and others have been working on MySQIF, what part of the development and the work with Al and Ben and Steve really took you over to a new awareness? And how do you think MySkiff should be used by normal engineers who don't know, as you say, uh, don't have much depth in encryption? How should they be using MySkiff going forward?
It provides an additional layer, I think, like a complementary layer that can be applied, because you have the current gold standard, which does the cursory protection. It does encrypt your communications and your web traffic to some extent, so it's not completely in the open. But then if you layer on or within that, you have the ability then to fully encrypt the data that you want to share, whether it be files or messages, within the app infrastructure to put that additional protection on it. So whether if someone has, if you have to going through over SSL or SSH or whatever you're doing to under normal web communication using, the SSL technologies, there's a moment there where the messages might be vulnerable, they're telling each other that, hey, I want to send something to this person, but the data itself being wrapped in MySkiff is now secure, and that even if they were intercepting a message that, hey, I wanted to communicate with this person, you would not have the ability, unless you were on one of the end user's devices, to actually see what that data is and have both keys available. So it's giving providing a robust protection on top of, or I guess on top of the existing infrastructure to support securing your communications.
Well, Ben, you said something similar to that earlier. From your perspective, if I'm an average network engineer and I've told my management that the implementation that I have recommended is secure and private and trusted, in light of the information that's come out already in this discussion, how do you go back to your management and say, what I said earlier probably is not accurate?
Well, the first thing I would do is not make claims that I would stick with kind of what Tim was saying, and Steve is I would not make claims as to the security unless I fully understand the math behind it. I would go with this is what's currently recommended. This is what the experts are saying, or what NIST is saying we should use. But in general, if you're doing network security for a company, one of the things that you should do is make sure that your management is aware that network security is transient in a sense. Any kind of security is transient because computers get more powerful. So something that's good today isn't necessarily going to be good, tomorrow or in a month or in a year. Mm-hmm. Even some of the math on our own stuff, three times of the universe, computers getting more powerful will shorten that. Now, getting it down to a tractable time is going to be very,
you
very
mean
difficult.
Only one time?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's going to be very difficult, but something that's like, if it's something that you expect to last for 100 years today, in a week or a month or a year, it might only take 1 year to break. And another decade later, it might only take a few days to break. So that the first thing that security people need to do is give their managers very basic education on security in the sense that nothing is secure forever. And as technology advances, security diminishes in how long it's going to take to break. From there,
However, let me break in here, Ben. However, one of the things that you should know is that with the technology that we're using with polymorphism, as computers get faster and better, we are able to cut down the number of, or the size, I should say, of our shards and make it even harder to be able to break.
Yes. As we have some advantages on technology advancing. I mean, in theory, it should still get shorter, but it's going to get shorter a lot slower than your average cipher because of some of the security stuff we're using. So, and then of course we can always update as new encryption algorithms come out that are going to take longer to break than something like AES. we can update our software based on what we've learned from those algorithms to make it, to basically maintain our lead, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so once you've educated your management, it becomes a lot easier, because then you can tell them, hey, I just read some papers, or I just came across some papers that that have proven that AES is weak and breakable in the way that we're using it. There's not really an alternative for us right now, but there's this other software that if we put this in as an extra layer of security, basically it'll hold us over. It will act as an extra layer of security, so that when somebody does eventually break into our system, we will still have methods of secure communication, and it will give us, it will extend the time that we have to update until there is something better for our overall network security.
Well, that makes sense when you're talking about an internal network or an intranet. But what about most intranets are also poking out to the internet and sending messages and transmissions in the clear? How does MySkiff relate to that environment where the IT people don't have full control over what happens once their information goes outside their internal structure?
Yeah, that's actually a critical thing. A lot of businesses have security rules about sending things outside, but you can't apply them to everything. Sometimes you have to send something to another business, to a client, to a business partner.
Right.
In that case, something like MySkiff allows them to do that, sending it over the internet with less worry, because now now the communication is going outside of the business network, so they lose control of that side of the security. But MySkiff is still maintaining a strong layer of security as it is transmitted over the internet.
Okay, so it seems like we have a big issue, a macro issue is intranets where the company controls the security environment, or at least has the capability to control it, and the wild internet where things go all over the world. And in that second scenario, it seems like the thing that we have been relying on is this public key infrastructure, the Federal Bridge Authority that's issuing these licenses, so that whether we are aware of it individually or not, each of our ISPs is paying money to these groups to manage these static public and private keys that are supposed to keep us secure when we're interacting with the server. Now, is anybody here saying that that system is still okay? Or what are you saying about that system?
The existing public key system, I think what we've discussed before applies here. Any time that you're using the same key for a long period of time, that's a problem. That's just fundamentally, if you're using the same key for a long period of time, what you're doing is you're giving an attacker more and more and more information, and the more information they have, the easier it becomes to figure out what that key is.
Yeah, the public key
And remember
infrastructure. Go ahead, Al.
Remember that on a computer, long time is like greater than 500 milliseconds.
Yeah.
So you're saying this happens pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, and it depends on the encryption algorithm. Something like AES only encrypts 16 bytes at a time. So, a couple of kilobytes will provide you will provide an attacker who understands how to do it enough information to break AES. So if you're sending like, a Word document or something like that, that's going to have enough information. I don't know exactly how the SSL encryption compares to AES, or how other public key type stuff compares to it, but it's not, if it's stronger at all, and I'm not sure that it is, then it's not significantly stronger. So the same thing applies. And when you're using it over the course of days or years, you're providing gigabytes or terabytes of data, which makes it trivially easy once you know how to break it, to break it really fast.
Okay,
the
let's
MySQIF messages that go out.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the MySQIF messages that go out into the wild are composed of lots of small messages. and each one has to be broken. So instead of having one break that has to happen for AES, let's say we use AES, but we use different keys in the shards. Now you have multiple different problems in parallel that have to be broken, and they all have to be right to get the message back, as opposed to just breaking one key.
So let's go back to this issue of AES versus TLS and SSL. So is SSL and TLS using AES, or is that a separate encryption standard?
Well, TLS and SSL use various encryptions, and AES is one of the ones that they use.
Okay.
So it's based on AES.
Are any of the ones that TLS, SSL using, are any of those standards more or less reliable? Or have they all been cracked?
Then what?
Then
they've been cracked. They've been shown to be. They've been shown to be vulnerable, and so they use AES, but they don't add a significant amount of, shall we say, security on top of it. It's just not sufficient to redeem the problems with AES, and the issues with TLS and SSL are significant enough that they're still used, even though people know that there are issues with them, because the experts say, well, it's better than nothing, use it.
Is this a case where the general user base cannot understand encryption mathematics, so the bottom line is anything you tell them they're going to accept?
I won't say necessarily that they're not capable of understanding, but they don't understand them. I got to make that clear, that some of them have the capability with the mathematics, but it becomes intricate the way that they're put together. The mathematics tend to be difficult to understand. They do tend to be difficult to understand and to put together, and so as a result, people are not willing to invest the kind of time it takes to become a really strongly educated with encryption. And as a result, they turn to people who are said to be experts. Now, some of them are truly experts, but as I said before, there are not very many true experts. Most people, it turns out, who are running that part of security have had one, maybe two classes in security, and maybe one class in encryption. And encryption, the way that it's run, is a very, very deep subject, and it takes years to become truly familiar and conversant with cryptography, and that's at the graduate level university.
Mm-hmm. So from the practical side, Tim and Steve, have you had any experiences yourself where encryption was cracked, and what kind of problems did that create for your networks? Anything?
We've seen this within some clients in the past, not particularly within networks that not particularly directly, I guess, involved with, but with some of the clients that I've worked with in the past, where they get a data breach, and then you're spending lots of time going through everything, trying to understand what was cracked, what was hacked, and what data has been compromised, and then trying to patch that the best way that's possible. And it's a considerable expense and resource, considerable expense, and takes a lot of resources to kind of put back together when it does happen. But it's unfortunate that, like I said, it sounds like what we're hearing is we can look at this as something that's going to become more and more common as computers get faster. And just overall, I guess if you look at some of the news reporting and stuff you hear, Just in general, you're starting to hear more about data breaches from credit card companies and things like that. They're happening on a more frequent basis than they used to.
Okay, I have a question about that. You hear about this massive amounts of data that are breached with a bank or with a retailer where millions of customers' data is supposedly siphoned off. Now, I have just a practical question. Not being a network engineer, how is that possible? Was everybody asleep at the wheel in the network operating center to allow that kind of transmission? How
I
does that
think,
happen?
let's see, I think I can address that from a cybersecurity uh, recovery perspective, building on what Tim had said, is the typical breach is not a breaking of encryption. It's from the human factor. If somebody clicks a link, done either naively or intentionally, and allows an application to run, which then opens the door for a bad guy to get access to the network. And so that's pretty much how most, if not all, these breaches occur. They don't crack encryption to get into an environment. They don't, break through a firewall or decrypt certificates that allow them to get access to the corporate environment. It's typically a unpatched system where they use a vulnerability that's out in the wild, or somebody naively gives up their access to the environment, even at a low level, because with the tools available in the public, they can slowly escalate their privileges up to where they have complete access to the network. And once they have that, they can cover their tracks and exfiltrate any data that they want. So it's less encryption and it's more human mistakes, I guess we can call it.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about this escalation. So, for an example, somebody walks through an office and they see the passwords for somebody's terminals stuck up on a sticky note on the person's monitor. Is that what you're talking about to get started?
That's one way, and it's surprisingly still common. Or there's reuse of passwords. Is somebody will have this nice, relatively they feel complex password, but you click a link in an email, a program runs, scavenges all the passwords that are cached or saved or hashed. That's another technology where they can, even though the password is encrypted, so to say, on your computer in what's called a hash, the encrypted password can be used to log in as this user. So it's really kind of an impersonation process where once they get the user's name, which is pretty simple to mine, they use the password however they gain it, through an application, through carelessness, and they break into the network. I should say they log into the network as this user, and a unprotected environment, which doesn't protect against, let's say, multiple logins by the same person from different places. The bad guys get in, and once they get in, they have free reign, and they just work their way through the network slowly, methodically, and they don't expose themselves for months until they have everything they need. They make one massive attack, download what they need, and they know they're going to get caught because their activity is too broad and too visible. They get what they need, they encrypt what's left, and then they ask for a ransom. So that's, I guess, the process in a nutshell.
So they use a form of encryption to lock up everyone's hard drives.
Oh, yes, and it's very complex, and they require a ransom, and it's a flip of a coin whether you're going to get a real key or not, whether you can decrypt what they've encrypted if you've paid. A lot of times it's just, eat your losses and try to recover from what you have hopefully wisely backed up in different places.
Well, that was one of the key. That's one of the probably the key question I get in talking about MySQIF is I already have encryption. What are you giving me that I don't have now? And then to your point, Steve, a lot of the breaches are not about encryption specifically. So why do these governments and these companies spend such inordinate amounts of time with the subject of encryption. And I'm going to ask Al and Ben to comment on that.
Well, first of all, it's a feel-good measure. The experts say I'm safe, so I must be safe. That's probably the primary one. And then, what we do with MySQIF is because the polymorphic system changes ciphers and key pairs very, very quickly, and it does it in a way that's hidden from many users and from attackers. It's a lot safer, but it is a feel-good measure that they're told that they must take in order to settle with insurance. Ben, what do you think here?
So the angle I'm thinking about is attackers will always go for the weakest point. So the reason that attackers go for social stuff right now, trying to attack the person.
Social meeting, that's what Steve was talking about.
Yeah. The social engineering stuff. Yeah, okay. Exactly. The reason that attackers go for that is because it seems easier to them than trying to break the encryption. Now, if the encryption ever gets easier to break than if it ever gets easier to break the encryption than it does to use social engineering, attackers will immediately switch to that because that's going to be the more profitable thing. In some sense, think of attackers like businesses. They're trying to get as much gain for as little time and effort as possible.
Yeah.
So in that sense, if a new strategy becomes easier, that's what the attackers will use. So the attackers don't know how to break AES yet. Now, I can guarantee that they are working on it because they're always working on trying to break every new encryption, especially AES is a really, really huge target because it's so common. The attacker that breaks AES basically gets the jackpot because they can get into every network in the world until it gets fixed. And NIST and so on don't have better standards than AES and haven't recommended anything better than AES. So if they can get into that, how long is it going to be before, from their point of view, how long is it going to be before NIST can develop something better? And that basically just gives them an open door for that long. So I can guarantee that attackers are trying to break AES because of that. If they figure out how to break AES, that's going to be their target. But as long as they aren't, as long as the encryption is better or is more secure than the people, then they're going to target the people.
And AES with CBC has been broken. Actually, we broke the CBC route in there, and we can also show how to break it with PCBC, the counter mode, CFB, and OFB. So in this case, what Ben is saying is right. We didn't have to break AES. We broke the randomization routine, and it gave us the data back there. People put together two systems, and one actually undid the other. It's called cyber fragility. And so they created a problem with cyber fragility, and we took example and showed that it was easy to break.
One of the packages that's been around since we started Leader Technologies is called PGP by Phil Zimmerman from the early 90s, back about the time PKI was getting implemented. For the longest time, Phil resisted at the request by the NSA to put a backdoor in his algorithms. I don't know whether that product has now been bought many times and is now held by Symantec, and I believe that even Proton Mail is using it. So where does PGP fit into this scenario?
PGP is a block cipher that has been fairly effective, but one of the problems with PGP is you can put a backdoor in it. See, with polymorphic systems, they change so fast that being able to use a backdoor is nearly impossible. We have not yet figured out how to put a backdoor in. We don't want to put a backdoor in. We want to keep backdoors out. But even ciphers that have backdoors are not effective because they don't last long enough to be able to get the information.
Well,
When you
I
use
was
things
just
like
roaming
encryption.
around the other day and found my PGP public keys that I had created back in 1995, I believe it was, and they're still out there. I assume I
Well,
could use
if
them
you've
if I
got
wanted.
public, yes, you could use them if you wanted to. The problem with public keys, once again, is it falls under Shor's algorithm with the trapdoor mechanisms that are and algorithms that are being used. Is stuff like PGP is going to become invalid in the post quantum environment because of what it's based on.
Okay, so say more
No
about
offense to PGP.
people are no. Phil's a great guy, and
Right.
Phil he has no control over his technology. But in terms of this idea of quantum, can we talk about that a minute? Because I hear post-quantum, I hear quantum proof, and all these words that the marketing guys love to talk about and love to use in their presentations. So what is the difference between post-quantum and quantum proof as two terms?
Okay, post-quantum refers to a time after which the first quantum computers are active. Now, the first quantum computer ran programs in the early 2000s, and so the post-quantum environment is here. The amount and number of qubits that are usable is going up very, very quickly. Right now, as of 2024, the largest number of qubits available is 433 by IBM. That was announced just this last year. When we get to about 6,000 qubits, Shor's algorithm will be viable and things will very quickly go downhill for people who are using PKE. And so we anticipate that as an industry, we anticipate that's going to happen in 5 years or less. Now, quantum proof algorithms are supposed to be the ones that are based on other trapdoor algorithms that quantum computers will have a difficult time with. Classical computers have problems with one sort, they have difficulties, I should say, with one sort of problem, and quantum computers have difficulties with others. So the big difficulty that we've got here is what may be safe in quantum terms is not as safe in classical terms and vice versa. So what is quantum proof is meant to be very, very big so that classical computers can't use it. But right now there aren't enough qubits to even implement that and do that encryption. That's going to take a while too. The first general purpose machine is said to need about 1 million qubits. And 1 million qubits is a little bit more than the 433 that are presently available. So it's going to take just a little bit of time to get there. But we're going to have two different types of problems. It turns out that symmetric key algorithms, which are the kind that are used generally on classical machines and not for PKE, they have one key. According to Grover's algorithm, you need to double the size of the key to keep it safe in the quantum environment than in the classical environment. And that's fairly easy to do because it turns out that polymorphism increases the effectiveness by factors of hundreds instead of just two, hundreds to thousands actually. So it turns out that we're probably safer staying with the symmetric key algorithms. And while people are researching the QPAs, the quantum proof algorithms, they're supposed to be safe in the quantum environment with quantum computers. While that's going, we can still use symmetric key algorithms very, very effectively. Is it important to get quantum proof algorithms? The answer is yes, of course it is. We want to have something that's safe in both environments, but what they've got now isn't. And that's the problem. It isn't.
Okay, so that is a general statement you're making.
Yes.
Okay. But you're in an environment where your whole field of study is providing capabilities and expertise in an environment, as I see it. Let me talk from my standpoint. Worked with Professor Chandler, who was quite involved with this whole public key infrastructure and the implementation of the AES standard. I was actually at his conference in 2001 when they announced the DES was dead and AES was the new thing. And since then, the entire technical world has implemented AES. So there are probably trillions of dollars of invested infrastructure in that mode right now. And so I can imagine everyone would be hard pressed to justify removing that and going to something else. So what I would like to do is ask each one of you from your perspectives. So I'm a network engineer out there, and I am hearing this tape maybe for the first time, and I've got to figure out what to do with this information, because if I say nothing, then I am not providing a service to my clients. If I say something, I may be the odd man out and get ushered right out of the room. So what do network engineers do with the information that we have just introduced, and the fact that MySQIF is now in the market and available? So I'm going to ask Tim if you would start with your perspective on what do you, as a software engineer, do with this information. And I'm sure you've thought about this before now, as it relates to your customers and your clients.
I think the biggest takeaway I have from it, and what I like about this the most, is that it does use the MySQIF infrastructure uses kind of the best in class available we have today for handling the infrastructure of the app. But it gives us, as a method of communication, a way to actually encrypt the actual data of that message and the contents of that in a way that is far more secure than anything out there on the market today. So for a simple use case of exchanging contracts, or for exchanging important files or business plans and things of that nature, you can share those with other people or companies on a point-to-point basis, and you can feel confident in the security and the confidentiality of what you're sending. Because even if the fact that a message was sent was intercepted, the contents of it would be still completely secure. Well, as completely as what is it, Al? 3 lifetimes of the universe or whatever.
Well, there's a little bit more
range.
To the story.
I mean, I have a simple, I have a simple answer to this. Is, first of all, you can use AES because we're library based. Okay, our job is to allow the system to use the best encryptions in the way that they are intended to be used mathematically to keep things safe. Okay, so if AES becomes one of the minor players because of problems with security, get rid of it. Until then, use it. You haven't lost any of your investment in AES. But the other thing is, do you want the improved security? If you're not worried about the information that's going through, then don't use the upgrade, and and then just worry about what happens when your data gets out there in the wild. I mean, it's a nasty way to say it, but we're better. If you want to use inferior security, then go ahead.
Steve, how about you? What do you say to the average guy like you out there in a corporation, knowing this information?
I think Tim summed it up very well. And like Al also touched on it also, is the data that you're sending is nearly unbreakable, unreadable. The mechanism that we're using to send it is best in class at this point, at this time. So you really don't have a lot of control over how you send it. but you have a lot of control about what you send. So the summary to that would be, if you have a very secure document that you don't want to be vacuumed up by one of the agencies out there for later decryption, if you don't care about that, then just use the tools that we have available and go about your way, just like Al said. If you want to make it nearly impossible for the vacuumer to decrypt what you sent, then use the MySQIF product.
Ben,
Okay.
so you and I were talking about this earlier, and what I think that the best service we can provide to most network engineers, in fact, practically all network engineers, is to look at suggesting how they can use MySQIF to improve their situation rather than compete with it.
Yeah. So the first recommendation for a network engineer that wants to start breaching this topic with managers is start the conversation about quantum security now. Make sure that they're aware that quantum is going to have an impact on security, and that you are starting to look for alternatives. And you might introduce MySQIF if you want to at that point, but it's definitely something you should have on the radar. Second, one of the big things that I think something like this is useful for is, in case of a breach, you can continue communicating over your company network securely as long as the attacker hasn't gotten access to all of the endpoint computers for the conversation.
You mean they get access to the computers inside a network? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, if they get access to the computer that's sending the message or the computer that's receiving the message, then you're pretty much out of luck. That's just basic security. Is if they get access to the machines that are doing the communication, then you're out of luck. But
Right.
say you get a breach and you're communicating with management. As a network engineer, you need to communicate with management. You may need to communicate with other network engineers, and you're discussing how are we going to close this breach? What are we going to do to make it harder for this to happen again? And the problem with that is, if there's an attacker on your system listening to the network communications, they can see your communications, they can see the conversation, they know what you're considering, and so they can take notes of all of that stuff and then start figuring out how to attack the specific security that you're going to use. If you can have that conversation securely, then they can't do that. Also, if they're watching their communications, they might be able to get in the way of your efforts to improve security to give themselves more time. So if you can communicate on the network without the attacker who's in your network being able to read your communications, that makes it easier to solve the problem, to get the attacker out and close it up without giving the attacker information that they could use to stay there or to get back in later.
Right. Well, that makes sense. That way, they've got some backup. They're not totally flying blind while they fix a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, I think that we have been given some good information and good perspective, and certainly wise perspective from people in software, in networks, in encryption, and in polymorphic encryption specifically. There is more history to the relationship in terms of what we have seen collectively over the last 20 years in the way our federal government is implementing encryption and how companies follow along. And just by way of perspective, the reason we don't see any difference between government encryption and corporate encryption is because most of the corporations are doing business with the government, and the government requires certain protocols to be used, and therefore that's what the companies implement. So it has to do with money, it has to do with contracts, and it has to do with other more nefarious aspects of it related to intelligence, and specifically Five Eyes intelligence, which we won't get into right now, but I think you can easily read between the lines. The reason our encryption systems are not more secure is because there is a vested interest among certain parties in this world to know what you're doing and to be able to gather that information either for current use or for future use. And that's why MySkiff was developed as a privacy app for you as an individual and or for you as a member of a corporation and the teams within that corporation. They can all go online at myskiff.com and they can sign up and start using this technology today and not have to wait for a supposed expert to come in and advise you on what to do next. You can do it yourself. You can take charge. So with that, guys, I'll say this first time was a great start, and there's lots more we can go into from your various experiences and expertise, and I'd like to do that. So maybe we can follow up again and further investigate this information. But for now, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. And for those who are listening, feel free to write us and say specifically the kinds of things that you would like us to talk about in coming events, because very rarely, I think, do technical people like this, especially at this high level, get together and talk about these problems. But we're all affected by it because we all use computers and phone, and that's what a phone is, and that's what a TV is anymore. And therefore, it's relevant to every one of us. And maybe we can peel away this onion and get it some better information for you to make good decisions.